The eviction notice was already nailed to the door when we arrived. My mother-in-law, Martha, stood on the cracked pavement with her arms crossed, a smug smirk plastered across her face. Her husband, Richard, stood a few paces behind her, looking uncomfortable but compliant, as always. My sister-in-law, Clara, was filming the whole thing on her phone, a glittery pink case clashing with the grim scene. They looked like vultures circling a kill, and I suppose, in their minds, I was it. My husband, Leo, stood frozen between me and them, his face a mask of misery. He was a human tug-of-war rope, and he was about to snap. "Well, well," Martha began, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Looks like your little fairy tale is over. We told you, Leo. We told you she was nothing but a weight dragging you down. Now you've lost your home." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. "This is your fault. Your poverty is like a disease, and you've infected my son. They had no idea." They had no idea that the flimsy paper nailed to the door was a prop, a piece of theatre I had arranged myself. They couldn't possibly comprehend that the modest two-bedroom house they were trying to have us thrown out of was just a tiny, insignificant piece of a portfolio I had acquired 2 months ago. They saw me as a poor orphan librarian, a charity case their son had foolishly married. They couldn't see the woman who could buy and sell their entire world with a single phone call. I let the silence hang in the air, savouring the peak of their arrogance. It was important for me to remember this exact moment, the final time they would ever look down on me. Why did I let them humiliate me, my husband, and our marriage for so long without saying a word? Why did I wait for this exact cruel moment to pull the trigger? To understand that, you have to understand the years of quiet cuts, the slow erosion of my spirit, and the nature of the promise I made to myself when a lawyer's letter changed my life forever. It all started with the simple, foolish hope that I had finally found a family. I wasn't always the cold, calculating woman standing on that sidewalk. Before I was an heiress, I was just Sarah, a librarian. My world was built from paper and ink, stories of other people's lives, other people's families. I was a ward of the state, passed through a series of decent enough foster homes until I aged out of the system at 18. I never knew my parents. I had no heirlooms, no family history, just a file in a government office and a deep, gnawing loneliness that I learned to hide behind a professional, quiet demeanour. I was proud of the small life I had built for myself. I had a tiny apartment, a job I loved, and my independence. But at night, the silence in my apartment was deafening. I craved connection, the easy comfort of belonging to someone, to something. Then I met Leo. He stumbled into my library one rainy afternoon, looking for a book on tax law for a certification exam. He was clumsy, earnest, and had a smile that made his whole face light up. He apologized for dripping water on the floor. I found the book for him, and he came back the next day and the day after that. He wasn't reading about taxes, he was finding excuses to talk to me. Our dates were simple. We'd share a pizza, walk through the park, and talk for hours. He was a junior accountant. I was a librarian. We were two ordinary people building an ordinary life. He spoke of his family, but in vague, sanitized terms. "My mum can be a little overbearing," he'd say with a sheepish grin, "and my sister Clara is a bit of a princess." He made it sound like a sitcom, a quirky but loving family. He seemed so different from them, so grounded and kind. He loved me for my quiet nature, for my love of books, for the way I saw the world. He didn't care that I had no family or that my bank account was perpetually hovering just above zero. He made me feel seen, cherished, and safe. When he asked me to marry him a year later, with a simple silver ring we'd picked out together, I cried. We got married at City Hall on a Tuesday. It was just us and two of my librarian friends as witnesses. Driving away from that courthouse, holding his hand, I truly believed I was finally getting what I'd always dreamed of: a husband, a home, and a family to call my own. I had no idea I was about to walk into a war. The dream shattered the first time we had dinner at their house. It was a large, immaculately clean home in a manicured suburb, but it felt cold, like a museum. There were no cozy family photos, only stiff, formal portraits and expensive, soulless art. I wore my nicest dress, a simple navy blue one I'd bought on sale. I felt it was elegant, but the moment Martha opened the door, her eyes scanned me from head to toe with a look of faint disgust, and I immediately felt underdressed and out of place. "So, you're the librarian," she said, her smile as thin as a razor's edge. Clara, who was lounging on a plush velvet sofa, didn't even get up. She just flicked her eyes in my direction before returning to her phone. Richard gave me a weak, sweaty handshake and mumbled something about the traffic. Leo squeezed my hand, a silent apology already forming on his lips. The dinner was an interrogation disguised as a meal. "I must admit, Sarah," Martha said, pushing a single pea around her plate, "I was surprised when Leo told us he was getting married, so sudden. We always imagined he'd end up with someone from, well, a similar background." The meaning was clear: someone with money. "And your family, dear," she continued, honing in on my greatest vulnerability. "What do they do?" The table went silent. Leo tried to intervene. "Mum, we talked about this." But I answered honestly, my voice quiet but steady. "I'm an orphan. I was raised in the foster care system." Martha's face filled with a theatrical pity that was far more insulting than outright scorn. "Oh, you poor thing. A charity case. How noble of you, Leo." She patted his arm, but her eyes were on me, filled with a cold assessment. Clara snickered. "Well, I guess that explains the dress," she muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. Later, as I was helping clear the table, not because I was asked, but because the silence of being the only one doing it was less painful than sitting there under their scrutiny, I heard Martha's sharp whisper from the living room. "She's not right for him, Richard. She has no breeding, no connections. She'll hold him back forever." In that moment, standing in their sterile kitchen with a stack of dirty plates, I understood. I hadn't married into a family. I had been acquired by a board of directors who had already deemed me a poor investment. That first dinner was not an anomaly. It was the template for our entire relationship. I quickly learned that in the eyes of Martha and Richard, there were two types of children: the golden child and the disappointment. Clara was gold-plated. They had paid for her business degree, which she barely passed, and then gifted her a lump sum to open a chic, unprofitable clothing boutique downtown. They co-signed for her luxury condo and bought her a new car every 3 years. Her fiancé, a smug stockbroker named Gregory, was treated like a visiting king. Every word he spoke was brilliant. Every business deal he closed was a cause for family celebration. Clara could do no wrong. When she maxed out their credit cards, she was learning about the world. When her business lost money for the 3rd quarter in a row, she was a brave entrepreneur finding her footing. Leo, on the other hand, was a constant source of letdown. He had worked his way through college, taking out loans he was still diligently paying off. He was responsible, hard-working, and kind, qualities they saw as weaknesses. And his biggest failure, his unforgivable sin, was marrying me. I was the anchor tied to his leg. If he didn't get a promotion, it was because he was distracted by our financial struggles, which were, of course, my fault. If we couldn't attend their impromptu weekend trip to a wine country resort, it was because my meager librarian's salary was holding him back from his birthright of luxury. I wasn't just a person they disliked, I was a convenient explanation for why their son wasn't as successful or ruthless as Clara's fiancé. The financial pressure was constant and suffocating. For my father-in-law's birthday, Clara announced that they would all be chipping in for a $1,000 golf club set. For her, $1,000 was a shoe shopping budget. For us, it was groceries and utilities for a month. When we tried to beg off, offering a more modest, heartfelt gift, Martha would sigh dramatically. "Oh, don't worry about it," she'd say, her voice dripping with poison. "Clara and I will cover your share. We wouldn't want you to feel embarrassed." The shame was the point. It was a tool to keep us in our place. Leo would be consumed by guilt for days, and the arguments it caused between us were corrosive. He was trapped in a web of obligation, and I was trapped with him, slowly beginning to resent the gentle, kind man I had married. The breaking point and the turning point arrived on the same day, delivered in a single envelope. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was sitting at our small kitchen table, staring at our bank account online. We were overdrawn. The $1,000 for Martha's birthday gift had done it. Leo had caved, transferring the money with a look of deep shame on his face. Now we wouldn't have enough for rent. I felt a familiar, hopeless despair wash over me. It was in that moment of absolute powerlessness that the mailman slid the letters through our door slot. Among the bills and takeout menus was a thick, creamy envelope. It felt heavy, important. The return address was embossed in crisp black letters: Finch, Sterling and Blackwood, attorneys at law. I had never heard of them. My first thought was that we were being sued, that another financial disaster had arrived. My hands trembled as I tore it open. The language inside was dense and formal. I scanned it, my brain struggling to parse the legal jargon. Then, certain words began to leap off the page. Last will and testament, estate of Mr. Alistair Finch. Maternal grandfather. I stopped breathing. I had no grandfather. I had no one. I kept reading. Sole heir, beneficiary. And then I saw the number, a figure so ludicrous it felt like a prank. It was itemized, from a portfolio of stocks and bonds to real estate holdings, all totaling an estimated value of $17,247,000. I sank onto a kitchen chair, the letter fluttering in my grasp. This had to be a mistake, a scam. With a shaking finger, I dialed the number on the letterhead. A calm, kind voice answered. It was Mr. Sterling himself. He gently, patiently explained everything. He told me about Alistair Finch, my grandfather, a man who had built an empire from nothing. He told me about my mother, Eleanor, his only child, who had fallen in love with a man he deemed unworthy, my father. Alistair had given her an ultimatum: the money or the man. She chose the man, she ran away, and he disowned her. After my parents died, he lost track of me completely. Mr. Sterling said my grandfather had spent the last 20 years of his life filled with regret, searching for me. His investigators finally found me just months before he died. His final wish, Ms. Connolly, the lawyer said softly, was to give you the life his daughter gave up and to apologize for his pride. When I hung up the phone, the world had changed. The chains of poverty and powerlessness that had defined my entire existence had just turned to dust. For a long time, I just sat there in the quiet kitchen, the lawyer's letter feeling heavier than a bar of gold in my hand. My first impulse wasn't to run into the street shouting with joy. It wasn't even to call Leo and tell him our troubles were over. My first ice-cold instinct was to hide it. I thought about Leo's face, the way it would light up with relief. And then I thought about what he would do next. He would want to run to Martha and Richard, to shove our newfound wealth in their faces, as proof that he hadn't made a mistake, that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. He would want to use this money to buy their love, a love they had withheld his entire life. And in that moment of chilling clarity, I knew I couldn't let that happen. Their approval wasn't worth a single cent of this fortune. This money wasn't a gift to be shared with them, it was a lens. It was a truth serum. I had been judged my entire life with them on my poverty. Now I would judge them on their greed. I folded the letter, slid it into a book on my shelf, and made a decision that would change everything. This would be my secret. The next day, I called Mr. Sterling and instructed him that under no circumstances was he to contact my husband or anyone else. All communication would come through me and me alone. I opened a private bank account and a P.O. box. Then, I arranged for a simple transfer of $5,000 into the joint account Leo and I shared. When Leo came home that night, haggard and defeated from a day of worrying about our finances, I showed him the positive balance. The library gave me a retroactive bonus for a literacy program I ran last year, I said, the lie tasting surprisingly easy on my tongue. It's not a fortune, but it will cover rent and then some. The relief that washed over his face was absolute. He hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. Sarah, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you. He was a good man, caught in a toxic trap, and he was so desperate for a lifeline he didn't even question it. The news of my bonus inevitably reached his family. A week later, Martha called. Leo, darling, she cooed over the phone, loud enough for me to overhear. I heard about Sarah's little windfall. How wonderful. Now that you two are finally getting on your feet, your father and I think it's the perfect time to start a family fund for that vacation home we've been wanting. The voice faded as Leo walked into the other room. My blood ran cold. My secret was no longer just a shield. It was about to become a weapon. Martha's vacation home fund quickly morphed from a vague suggestion into an obsession. She found a property, a ridiculously overpriced log cabin on a lake 2 hours away, and declared it the family's new legacy project. She called a family meeting via video chat. Clara and her fiancé Gregory smugly announced they were pledging $75,000. Then all eyes turned to the small square on the screen where Leo and I sat in our cramped living room. So, Leo, Martha said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation, we've put you and Sarah down for a $50,000 contribution. You can have it to us by the end of the month. The silence after she spoke was deafening. $50,000. It was more than Leo made in a year. It was a fantasy number thrown out with such casual cruelty that it could only be interpreted as a test of loyalty, a demand for tribute we could not possibly pay. After the call ended, the biggest fight of our marriage erupted. They're insane, Leo yelled, pacing the floor. They know we don't have that kind of money. Then the answer is no, Leo, I said, my voice unnervingly calm. It's not that simple. We can't just say no. It's my mother. Yes, you can, I replied, looking him straight in the eye. You are a grown man with a wife and a home. You can say no. He saw something in my eyes then, a hardness he hadn't seen before. He pleaded, he bargained, he suggested we drain our tiny savings to give them a good faith payment. I refused. For the first time, I gave him an ultimatum of my own. It is them or us. There is no middle ground anymore. Shaking and pale, he eventually made the call. I didn't hear what was said, but I saw the aftermath. He came back into the living room looking like he'd seen a ghost. She said if I don't get the money and leave you, I'm dead to her. The next few days were a tense, miserable silence. Leo slept on the sofa. I, meanwhile, made a phone call to Mr. Sterling. With a simple wire transfer, my holding company, AF Enterprises, purchased the small house we were renting. The ownership was buried deep inside a numbered LLC. I was just waiting for their next move. It came a week later. I was driving home from the library when I saw them parked on our street. And there, nailed to our front door, was an official-looking eviction notice. My trap had been set. Now, the animals had walked right into it. I let Martha's words hang in the air, each one a perfectly preserved specimen of her arrogance. Your poverty is like a disease, she repeated, savouring the line. Clara giggled, zooming in on my face with her phone. Get a good shot of this, honey, Martha said to her. This is the day my son finally comes to his senses. Leo looked at me, his eyes pleading, begging me to do something, say something, though he had no idea what. I simply stared back at Martha, my expression unreadable. Then, slowly, deliberately, I took out my phone. "Oh, what's this?" Clara sneered. "Calling one of your librarian friends to come cry with you?" I ignored her. I found the number in my contacts and pressed dial, putting the call on speakerphone for everyone to hear. It rang once. "Sterling speaking." "Mr. Sterling, it's Sarah Connolly," I said, my voice as crisp and cold as a winter morning. "I have you on speaker. I need you to provide some clarification on a few business matters for my family." "Of course, Ms. Connolly. How can I help?" His calm, professional voice echoed in the driveway. I started with the house. "Mr. Sterling, could you please confirm for us the beneficial owner of the residential property at 123 Maple Street?" Martha scoffed. "We already know it's some faceless LLC. They'll be happy to have paying tenants instead of you freeloaders." "The property is owned by Oakwood Holdings LLC, Mr. Sterling said, right on cue, which, in turn, is a wholly owned subsidiary of AF Enterprises. I didn't let them process it. "And who is the director and sole shareholder of AF Enterprises, Mr. Sterling?" "You are, Ms. Connolly." The silence that followed was stunning. Martha's jaw literally dropped. Leo took a staggering step back, looking at me as if he'd never seen me before, but I wasn't finished. "Thank you. Now, regarding recent commercial acquisitions, does AF Enterprises have any holdings on Commerce Drive?" I asked, my eyes locking onto my father-in-law, Richard, who suddenly looked nauseous. "Yes," Mr. Sterling replied. "We acquired the building at 745 Commerce Drive last month. The main tenant is an accounting firm, Gable and Thorne." Richard's face went white. I was his boss's landlord. Finally, I turned my gaze to Clara, whose phone was now aimed at the pavement. "One last thing. I know we acquired a portfolio of distressed small business loans. Could you check if the debt for a boutique called Clara's Closet was included in that purchase?" There was a brief pause. "Yes, Ms. Connolly. We hold all of her outstanding notes. They appear to be in default." Clara's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the concrete. I ended the call and put my phone away. I looked at the 3 broken, horrified people standing on my lawn. "The eviction notice is a theatrical prop," I said softly. "But your financial ruin is very real. Now, for the last time, get off my property." For a moment, nobody moved. They stood like statues in a crumbling museum, their expressions of shock hardening into disbelief. It was Martha who broke the silence, her voice a pathetic, wheezing whisper. "Sarah, please, we didn't understand. If we had only known—" "Known what, Martha?" I asked, my voice cutting through her stammering. "That I had money. So your kindness is conditional? Your respect has a price tag? You called me a disease. You stood here and called my existence a sickness infecting your son. The only disease here is your greed, and it seems to be terminal." Clara began to wail, a grotesque, childish sound. "My store! You can't take my store. It's everything to me." "It was a toy your parents bought you that you didn't know how to play with," I said, feeling nothing but a vast, empty distance from her. "And now the debt belongs to me. This is the real world, Clara. You should have paid your bills." Then I turned to Leo. He was the only one whose opinion still mattered, the only one who could still hurt me. His face was pale, his eyes wide with 1,000 questions. "Sarah, why?" he breathed, the words barely audible. "Why wouldn't you tell me?" The anger in me finally subsided, replaced by a deep, profound sorrow. Because I needed to know. Leo, I needed to know if you loved me, or if you just loved that I was someone you could protect, someone who made you feel strong in a family that always made you feel weak. I needed to see if you would finally stand up for me, for us. And every single time, you failed the test. You let them tear me apart because you were terrified of their disapproval. This money didn't change who I am. It only revealed who everyone else is, including you. I looked past him, at the wreckage of his family. The choice was never about my money. It was about your character. It was always about your character. As if on cue, a polished black sedan I had summoned earlier pulled silently to the curb. A driver in a crisp suit got out and opened the rear door for me. "I'm going to go now," I said, my voice soft but unbreakable. "I need space to decide what my future looks like. And you," I said, looking directly at Leo, "need to decide what kind of man you're going to be when there's no one left to blame." I walked to the car, got in, and didn't look back. I left them all standing on the lawn of my house, surrounded by the ruins of their own making. As the car pulled away, I finally let myself take a deep breath. My new life was just beginning. The fallout was swift, silent, and absolute. From the quiet, air-conditioned comfort of my new office overlooking the city, I reviewed the reports from Mr. E.I. Sterling as if they were mundane business updates. The lease for Gable and Thorne was, as I had predicted, renegotiated. Citing a need to streamline operations, the building's new management terminated their contract for the entire fourth floor. Richard's entire department was eliminated. He was forced into a meagre early retirement, his decades of service ending with a small cardboard box of his belongings. Next was Clara's file. My lawyers called in her defaulted business loans. With no capital and no more credit line from her parents, Clara's closet folded in less than a week. The liquidation sale barely covered a third of her debt. The rest, as per the contracts Richard and Martha had so carelessly co-signed years ago, became their burden. They sold their cold, sterile house in a desperate attempt to stay solvent, but it wasn't enough. They moved into a small, bleak apartment across town, their social status and arrogance evaporating overnight. They tried to contact me, of course, a flood of hysterical voicemails, tearful emails, even a pathetic, handwritten letter from Martha begging for mercy. I instructed my assistant to block their numbers and return all correspondence unopened. They no longer existed in my world. A month later, a single handwritten letter with no return address made it to my desk. It was from Leo. He wasn't asking for money or forgiveness. He was just reporting. He told me he had started intensive therapy, that he was finally confronting the lifetime of emotional abuse and his own cowardice. He had taken a simple job at a hardware store, was living in a small studio apartment, and was, for the first time in his life, completely on his own. "I failed you, Sarah," he wrote, "not as an heiress, but as my wife. I am so sorry for the man I was. I hope one day to become a man you would have been proud of." I folded the letter, a strange mix of sadness and hope stirring in me. He was finally on the right path. Whether it would ever lead back to me was a question for another day. For now, I had my own work to do. I swiveled in my chair and picked up a pen. In front of me was the checkbook for the new Finch Family Foundation. I made out the first official donation to the state foster care system for an amount that would ensure hundreds of children had opportunities I never did. I signed my name, Sarah Connolly, and looked out the window at the sprawling city below. The money hadn't been the prize, the freedom was.